since we're making rice, we have the opportunity to make another byproduct called rice wash water. And essentially what we do, wow, nice. We're gonna stir around this rice and rinse off all of those extra starches, and optimally what we're going for is to kind of fully clean the rice. And so we're gonna rinse this around until we kind of come out with a semi-clear rinse, and then we will use that water as a food source essentially for airborne lactic acid bacteria that are present everywhere and in extremely wildly diverse species that you would not get from say a store-bought probiotic or yogurt that just has maybe 3 to 5 species of lactobacilli. So I'll show you now. You can see how we just have this, essentially it's like rice milk. The reason we're using the rice wash water for this process is, for one, we're already making rice, so it's an easy byproduct. For two, the rice wash water is a really simple food source that is almost too simple for most microbes, and so it attracts lactobacilli, but not necessarily a lot of other microbes, unless it's not harvested within the right time frame. So we'll let this sit out for about 3 days. It's about 78 degrees or so. It should take about 2.5 to 3 days. So we'll come back and we'll keep smelling this. Right now it kind of just smells like rice. So essentially we're gonna let this rice wash water sit out for about 3 days, and then we'll come back to it when it's developed the right smell, which is something that you kind of have to learn by experience, but you're looking for something that hasn't quite turned sour yet, but doesn't just smell like rice. It doesn't smell just like you have rice in a pot. It has kind of more of a slightly sweetish-ish, fermented, yogurty-ish, hard to describe smell. And if you let it go too far, it starts to go sour, which that's not what you want. But right around 2.5 to 3 days is when you'll have a plenty enough inoculum of lactic acid bacteria to then mix that rice wash water at a 1 to 10 ratio to milk. Whole milk works best, but you can use any milk. Yeah, this is ready. We will let this sit with a paper towel covered over it, which I don't have that on me right now, but I will grab those and put a paper towel on this, and this will sit for around 3 days. So it's been about 4 days now. I accidentally left it a little longer than I was intending. A day kind of just slipped by me, but I think it's actually been a blessing in disguise. I may have actually chosen to let it go another day longer had I looked at it yesterday. But it's been raining for the last few days, so it's been fairly chilly out, and it went past that rice smelling where it just smells like rice water, and now it's into this more almost like slightly fermented kind of sweetish sour smell. It's hard to really describe, but once you do it enough times you'll get an understanding, and it's usually roughly around 3 days, but like I said, it can vary depending on temperature. If it's cooler, like in my situation now, you can let it go maybe a day longer. And if it's warmer, you might want to take it at day 2. You can see here that there is some separation, and for me, I like to give it a little stir just to mix up the biology, is where my thought is. LAB is a facultative anaerobe, meaning that it actually can thrive in both aerobic and anaerobic environments. So you will have a range of different lactic acid bacteria living in different areas in here. So our next step is going to be taking this rice wash water. We're going to use 1 part rice wash water to 10 parts milk. So what that looks like is we don't have to necessarily measure, is we can just pour that in and say, it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, that's not exactly 1/10 of this container. It's a little bit more, but that's totally okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just need enough to get a little kickstart of biology to inoculate the milk, because essentially this is a starter. You have collected lactic acid bacteria from the air around you, and they're in this rice wash water. And so when you put it with the milk, like what we're going to do here, when we add the milk, there may have been some other biology that is also living in here, but the thing is the lactic acid bacteria have a perfect food source for them because there's a lot of lactose in milk. We're just going to let this sit for about, again, 3 to 4 days. I think it might take a little longer because we're in cooler temperatures. When it's around 80 degrees, it usually takes about 2.5 to 3 days. I've seen it in 48 hours, but I think it's probably going to take around 4 days, maybe even longer, for this to fully separate. And what we're going to look for is we're going to look for that full separation of the solids, which is the curds, and the liquid, which is the whey, which is our lactic acid bacteria serum. So we'll come back 4 days later from now, and you can see the results. We're just going to cover this up with a paper towel so that it has a breathable lid. So we're going to leave this for about 4 days, and then we'll come back and see how well it's separated. I will be checking this at around 3 days to see what it looks like. All right, we're back in the lab to finish up labs, LAB, lactic acid bacteria, right here. So actually I want to show you what happens when the lactic acid bacteria separates. You have the whey down here, which is this clear liquid, and then you have the fat, the curds, the protein is all right in here. And you can use this for yogurt, you can make cheese, you can do so many things with this part. And then this, you can put into your soil, and it's wonderful at breaking down organic matter and flocculating the soil and creating proper crumb structure and pore space. So LAB is a wonderful addition to natural farming, and it gives you a wonderful byproduct of cheese or yogurt or whatever else you want to do with the curds. So I'll just show you exactly how we strain that out and what that looks like. Simply, basically what we do is we just strain. I'm going to take a spoon, and I like to kind of slice it essentially. This batch did not separate quite as much as most of my batches separate. I normally get like a half and half. This is, I would say, 30% liquid, 70% solids. And it's not quite usual for my case. I think it's due to the fact of how cold it's been. This actually took quite a lot longer than I was expecting it to. Normally my LAB takes around 2.5 to 3 days. This was, I want to say, 4.5, 5 days. I'll have to check back on the exact date, but I just come out here and check it with my nose and look at it. I actually had to bring it inside the house because it hadn't done anything after 3 days. It was still milk. It didn't really smell fermented. It didn't really smell changed because it was like, on average, maybe 55, 60 degrees outside. So, you know, at night dropping into the low 40s, in the day getting up into the 70s. Not much opportunity for the microbes to really grow. That was well done. That's good yogurt right there. So for making yogurt, you pretty much just let this strain a little bit, and then you add this to a blender, and then whip it up, and it's yogurt. The liquid does like to separate out of it afterwards, so you kind of need to keep stirring it. It's like when you buy the good stuff from the store, it separates. Okay, so the goal is to get as much of the fat and the proteins out of the milk as possible. Because the protein is what's going to cause the LAB to go sour or go bad, essentially. If we're able to remove all these proteins, then it will be much more shelf stable. If done properly, LAB can last up to 3 months in the fridge. Ideally, it works best when you can avoid breaking up any of these chunks. But that wasn't really possible in this scenario because of how much solids there was. So I'm gonna kind of do multiple strainings through this. I'm gonna wait for all this to settle, and then I'll pour everything off the top, and then I'll let it settle again, pour off the top, let it settle again, and that'll be how I will filter out most of these fats from this milk. But this is gonna kind of just sit and strain out for a little while. But that's pretty much done. After this has been separated and you've filtered out enough of the proteins, then you can go ahead and put a lid on it. This is the wrong size lid, but you can go ahead and put a lid on it, and then put it in the fridge, and that'll be shelf stable for, like I said, up to 3 months if you filtered out enough of the proteins. Alright, have a good one.